Never thought I'd be the guy spying on his own wife, but there I was, hidden cameras and all. You see, it started with a text message, the kind that turns your world upside down. A simple, "I miss you," from a number that wasn't mine. My wife, always careful, slipped up this time. It felt like a sucker punch, right in the gut. I was boiling over, mind racing with betrayal. Without thinking twice, I rigged our house with "Yeah, I know, it sounds extreme, but you don't think straight when your heart's been trashed." I needed proof, something solid to confront her with. Next up, the big show. I called her family over for the weekend. "Family reunion," I said. They bought it, everyone cheerful and unsuspecting. My wife, she was the picture of innocence. That stung the most. Dinner time was a blast, until it wasn't. Midway through, I grabbed the remote and switched on the TV. There it was, the grand reveal, footage of her and Mr. Wonderful, all cozy and loving. Like watching a car crash in slow motion, I tell y'all. The room went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Her dad, the retired judge with that no-nonsense look, his face crumpled in disbelief. The man spent his life upholding the law, and here was his daughter, breaking the rules of her mom, a staunch believer in marital sanctity, looked like she'd seen a ghost. Her brother, well, he couldn't even sit still, pacing around like a caged animal. Disgust, shame, shock, it was all there, written on their faces. Me? I was a mix of anger, vindication, and this deep, hollow sadness. It's one thing suspecting your wife's cheating. It's another watching her family's hearts break right along with yours. That image, her on the screen, oblivious to the pain she was about to cause, it'll stick with me forever. The aftermath was a storm of yelling, crying, and accusations. Her dad, he couldn't even look at her. Said something about betraying the family name. Her mom was in tears, asking why over and over. And her brother, man, he was livid, like he wanted to punch something. Probably me for airing their dirty laundry. My wife. She was a mess, sobbing, begging for forgiveness, trying to explain. But what's there to explain when you're caught red-handed? I just sat there, watching the chaos, feeling like I was in some twisted reality show. Yeah, it was cruel, maybe too cruel. But in that moment, all I could think about was the lie my life had become. And her family, they deserved to know the truth, no matter how ugly. The morning after the big reveal, the house felt like a graveyard, silent, heavy with regret. My wife, her eyes puffy from crying, tried to talk to her mom. But let me tell you, her mom, a lady who's all about family honor and tradition, wouldn't have any of it. She just sat there, stone-faced, looking straight through her own daughter. "You've brought shame to us," she said, voice cold as ice. The words cut deep, you could see it in my wife's eyes. Her brother, this big guy who used to idolize her, couldn't even bear to be in the same room. He kept shooting these angry glances before finally storming out. He slammed the door so hard, the whole house shook. My wife crumpled right there, sobbing like a child. It was a mess, a real-life drama unfolding right in my living room. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, decision made. First thing next morning, I went down to the courthouse and filed for divorce. Irrefutable evidence of adultery, the form read. Never thought I'd tick that box. It was surreal, signing those papers, like closing the book on a chapter of my life. Word travels fast in small towns, and ours is no exception. By noon, everyone knew. Whispers at the grocery store, stares at the gas station, you name it. Our once quiet life became the town's hottest gossip. I heard bits and pieces, can you believe it? And never saw it coming. Yeah. Join the club. The rail kicker came a few days later. I was picking up some stuff at the supermarket when I saw it go down. The affair partner's wife, a short, fiery woman, confronted my wife right there between the aisles. It was like watching a showdown in a Wild West movie, only with shopping carts and canned goods. "You homewrecker!" she yelled, jabbing a finger in my wife's face. My wife, looking like a deer in headlights, just stood there, taking the verbal beating. People gathered, phones out, recording every second. It was humiliating, sure, but part of me thought, well, what did you expect? After that, things just spiraled. My wife, once a respected member of the community, turned into this pariah. Friends avoided her. Neighbors whispered behind her back. She'd go out and come back looking more defeated each time. It was like watching someone get slowly erased, piece by piece. In the midst of all this, I found a strange kind of peace. Not happiness, mind you, but a sense of closure. It was over, the lies, the deceit, all of it. I was ready to start over, even if it meant rebuilding from scratch. But my wife, she was just beginning to face the consequences of her choices. And let me tell you, they were just starting to pile up. The day after the supermarket showdown, my phone started buzzing non-stop. Texts, calls, even emails. Everyone I knew was reaching out. Sorry to hear what happened, they'd say, or, if you need anything, just holler. It was like I'd joined some exclusive club of the wronged and pitted. Not a great feeling, but it's nice knowing people care. Meanwhile, my wife's world was unraveling faster than its sheep sweater. Turns out, her lover boy got canned from his job. Company policy, they said. No messing around with married folks. That's karma for you, swift and brutal. But wait, it gets better. My wife lost her job too. The scandal, or so they called it, was bad for business. Imagine that. One day you're a respected professional, the next you're out on your ear because of who you're sleeping with. Her parents, who'd always been her rock, turned their backs on her. We can't condone what you've done, her dad said. Her mom just nodded, lips pressed in a thin line. I never thought they'd shut her out, but I guess everyone has their breaking point. The real gut punch came when I found a letter she'd written to him. I'm leaving my husband, it said. We can finally be together. That stung more than anything else. It wasn't just a fling. She was planning to bail on our entire life together. Funny how a piece of paper can hit harder than a right hook. So there I was, Mr. Popular with a phone full of sympathetic messages, and there she was, pretty much exiled from her own life. Her lover was jobless, her parents had disowned her, and her plans for a happy future with Mr. Wonderful were in tatters. It's a strange feeling, watching someone who was your world lose everything they have. Part of me felt vindicated, sure, but there was this other part, a quieter, sadder part, that just felt sorry for her. Not enough to take her back, but enough to wish things had gone differently. You know, they say that when one door closes, another opens. Well, in my case, it felt like a whole bunch of doors slammed shut, while for me, maybe a window cracked open somewhere. It was time to start picking up the pieces, for both of us. But for her, it was more like starting from scratch, with a whole lot of baggage to carry. The day I canceled our joint bank accounts and credit cards felt like severing the last tie that bound us. Sure, it left her financially high and dry, but at that point, I was past caring. I remember thinking, let's see how you manage without my money. Her situation went from bad to worse when her lover decided to patch things up with his wife. Can't say I was surprised. Guys like that, they're all about the thrill, not the aftermath. There she was, dumped by her affair partner, cut off by her family, jobless, and now, broke. She came to me after that, teary-eyed and desperate. Please, we can work this out, she begged. But I was done. I'd built a wall around my heart, and no amount of crying was going to bring it down. It was harsh, turning her away, but sometimes you've got to be cruel to be kind, right? Next thing I know, her car's being towed away. Missed payments. Another casualty of her new, unraveled life. It was a sad sight, watching her plead with the tow guy. But he just did his job, indifferent to the sob story behind the wheels. With no car, no money, and nowhere else to go, she ended up in some cheap motel on the outskirts of town. I heard about it from a buddy who saw her checking in. Looks like she's hit rock bottom, he said. I didn't want to think about her in that dingy place, but it was hard not to. Every time I passed that motel, a part of me wanted to turn in, see if she was okay. But I'd force myself to drive on. She made her bed, I'd mutter, trying to convince myself I was over it. But deep down, I knew I wasn't. It's tough, trying to hate someone you once loved. Her fall from grace was like watching a house of cards collapse, slow, inevitable, and utterly complete. From a cozy home and a loving husband to a lonely room in a seedy motel, it was a stark reminder of how quickly life can turn on you. In those days, I'd lie awake at night, wrestling with a mix of emotions. Anger, betrayal, pity, a messy cocktail that kept me tossing and turning. It's funny how life works. One minute you're planning your future, and the next, you're watching it all go up in flames. Her journey from the suburbs to that motel was more than just a change of address. It was a plunge into a reality she'd never known, a hard lesson about choices and consequences. And me? I was just trying to keep my head above water, navigating my new life without her. But even as I moved forward, part of me couldn't help but look back. Not out of love, maybe not even out of sympathy, but out of a simple, human concern for someone I once shared my life with. It's complicated, entangling your feelings from the wreckage of a broken marriage. Hey everyone, I hope you're enjoying the video so far. If you do, please take a moment to hit that like button, it really helps me out and lets me know you appreciate the content. Also, if you haven't already, consider subscribing to the channel. Subscribing is a great way to stay updated with all the latest videos and to be part of our growing community. It's quick, it's free, and it ensures you won't miss out on any upcoming content. So go ahead, smash that like button and hit subscribe. Your support means a lot and keeps this channel going. Thanks for watching. Life's funny, Just when you think you're down for the count, it throws you a lifeline. That's what happened with me and my job. Amidst all the personal chaos, my boss calls me in and bam, promotion. More responsibilities, better pay. It felt like a nod from the universe saying, hey, you're gonna be all right. Meanwhile, my ex-wife's world kept shrinking. Her best friend, who'd been her confidant for years, finally had enough. I can't support what you did, she told her, and just like that, another pillar in my ex's life crumbled. It's one thing losing your husband and family, but losing your best friend? That's a whole other level of loneliness. I heard she tried to start some online business. Selling handmade jewelry or something. But it tanked before it even got off the ground. Not for lack of trying, mind you. She poured her heart into it, but sometimes that's not enough. The world can be unforgiving like that. Then one day, a buddy of mine says he saw her at a fast food joint, hairnet and all, flipping burgers. The fall from a cozy office job to a greasy spoon, it's not something you see every day. It's not that there's anything wrong with honest work, but for her, it was like admitting defeat, Around the same time, I started seeing someone new. She was the complete opposite of my ex, straightforward, no drama, just simple and kind. We met at a local book club. She was into mystery novels, and I guess after all the mysteries in my own life, it felt right. It was nice, feeling that connection again, like stepping into the sun after a long night. Dating her was a breath of fresh air. No secrets, no lies, just two people enjoying each other's company. It made me realize how strained things had been with my ex, even before everything went down. This new relationship felt easy, natural. It was a reminder that not everything in life has to be a struggle. Seeing my ex in that fast food uniform, though, it gave me a weird mix of feelings. Part of me felt sorry for her, nobody dreams of ending up like that. But another part, maybe the less generous part, thought, well, you made your bed. My life was moving forward, new job, new relationship, new beginnings. It was like I'd stepped onto a new path, leaving the wreckage behind. But every now and then, I'd catch myself wondering about her, about how different our lives had become. It's strange, you know, how life can take two people who were once so close and send them spinning into entirely different orbits. I was on the rise, finding new love, new success. She was just trying to keep her head above water, one burger flip at a time. In the grand scheme of things, it was a chapter of new beginnings for me and harsh realities for her. A tale of two paths diverging from the same broken road. And as much as I wanted to focus on my own journey, part of me couldn't help but look back at hers, if only just to see how far we'd both come. So, things got worse before they got better. Word around town was that my ex-wife's health was taking a nosedive. Stress, they said, and who could blame her? Living in that dingy motel, working a dead-end job, her world had turned upside down. I'd see her around, looking thinner, eyes hollow. It was like watching someone fade away in slow motion. Then one day, I get this letter. Her handwriting on the envelope, shaky and uncertain. I knew it was some sort of apology, a plea maybe. But I couldn't bring myself to open it. Instead, I just dropped it back in the mailbox, returned to send her. Harsh, maybe, but I had to draw the line somewhere. Around the same time, her folks packed up and left town. Sold their house, the one she grew up in, and moved out of state. Didn't even say goodbye to her, or so I heard. That had to sting, being abandoned by the people who raised you. It's one thing feeling like the world's against you, but your own parents? That's a whole other kind of hurt. In court, when it came to alimony, I put my foot down. She cheated, I told the judge. Why should I pay for her mistakes? The judge agreed, and just like that, I was off the hook. But walking out of that courtroom, it wasn't victory I felt. It was more like relief. Relief that this chapter was finally closing. The final blow for her came when she was evicted from the motel. Missed payments, they said. I remember driving past, seeing her sitting on the curb, surrounded by a few bags of belongings. It was a pitiful sight, really. There she was, the woman I once promised to spend my life with nowhere to go, no one to turn to. I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel a pang of something, guilt, maybe, or pity. But I had my own life to live. I'd moved on, found peace, and there was no going back to that mess. Her life, though, seemed to be spiraling out of control. From a comfortable home to a roadside curb, it was a stark reminder of how quickly fortunes can change. And as much as I wanted to wash my hands of her and the whole sorry saga, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of something. Not love, not anymore, but maybe just a trace of the connection we once had. It's funny how life works. One minute you're on top of the world, and the next, you're scraping rock bottom. My ex-wife's downfall was a testament to that. A tale of loss, regret, and the consequences of choices made. Seeing her like that, all alone, it made me think about how fragile it all is. Our lives, our relationships, our sanity. One wrong turn, and it can all come crashing down. So, as I drove past her that day, part of me wanted to stop, to offer some kind of help. But I kept driving, telling myself it was for the best. After all, some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt. And sometimes, the only way forward is to leave the past behind, no matter how hard it might be. Life's a roller coaster, ain't it? Just when you think you've got it all figured out, it throws you a curveball. Take this one time. A buddy of mine says, "Hey, your ex has been asking about you." I just shrugged it off. Old news, water under the bridge. Meanwhile, I was busy putting a ring on the finger of my new girl. Yeah. I popped the question, and she said yes. It felt good, you know, moving on, starting fresh. She was everything my ex wasn't, honest, straightforward, real. Putting that engagement ring on her was like saying, that part of my life? It's over. But life has a way of reminding you of things you'd rather forget. Like when I heard my ex ended up in the hospital. Exhaustion and malnutrition, they said. The news hit me weird. Sure, we were done and dusted, but once upon a time, she was my everything. It's hard to hear something like that and not feel a thing. She tried reaching out to her brother too, tried to patch things up. But he wasn't having any of it. Can't blame him, really. She'd burned a lot of bridges, and some just don't get rebuilt. Her own brother turning his back on her, that's gotta hurt, no matter how tough you are. Then I hear she's been seen wandering around town, looking all lost and out of sorts. It's a small place, our town, so news travels fast. People said she looked like a ghost, just aimlessly walking the streets. I pictured her there, all alone, and part of me wanted to do something, anything. But what can you do, right? It's strange how life works. There I was, celebrating my new engagement, and there she was, at what seemed like the lowest point of her life. I'd moved on, but she was stuck, trapped in this downward spiral. Sometimes, late at night, I'd think about her. Not in a longing way, but more like wondering how things got so messed up. We'd started with such high hopes, and now? It was like we were living in two different worlds. I'd lie there next to my fiancé, feeling her warmth, her steady breathing, and I'd feel grateful. Grateful for a second chance at happiness, for finding someone who made me believe in love again. But there was always this niggling thought in the back of my mind about my ex. Where did she go wrong? Was there something I could have done differently? Questions with no answers, I guess. Life's not always fair, and it sure isn't kind. You can find happiness one moment and lose everything the next. Seeing my ex so broken, so lost, it was a reminder of that. A reminder to hold on to what you've got, to cherish it, because you never know when it might slip away. So, as I planned my future with my fiancé, part of me kept looking back at the past, at the life I'd left behind. Not with regret, but with a sort of melancholy understanding that sometimes, life just takes you places you never expected to go. So there I was, planning a wedding, while my ex-wife's life was unraveling faster than a ball of yarn. It's funny how life splits paths. One day you're sharing dreams, the next you're strangers with nothing in common but memories. I heard through the grapevine that some local charity offered to help her out. But pride's a funny thing, it can make you turn down even a helping hand. She said no, preferring to struggle on her own. Made me think of the woman I once knew, always too stubborn for her own good. Her mental state, though, that was another story. People started noticing, talking. They'd see her in town, muttering to herself, lost in her own world. It was sad, really. You never want to see someone you once loved fall apart like that. Then one day, word got around that she'd been arrested for shoplifting. Food, basic stuff, nothing fancy. It was a shock, sure, but more than that, it was a wake-up call. This was serious. She wasn't just down on her luck, she was desperate. In jail, she bumped into an old friend of hers, someone who'd also seen better days. This friend, she'd had her own fall from grace, a story of lost jobs and bad decisions. They were like two peas in a pod, both trying to make sense of where it all went wrong. I thought about her a lot in those days. Not with anger or resentment, but with a sort of detached sadness. It's weird, you know, feeling sorry for someone you once thought you'd spend your whole life with. I'd look at my fiancé, so full of life and hope, and then I'd think of my ex, her life in tatters. It was like a tale of two cities, one bathed in sunlight, the other shrouded in shadows. Sometimes I'd catch myself wondering if there was something I could have done to stop her spiral. But then I'd shake it off. You can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved, can you? The news of her arrest and her run-in with her old friend made the rounds in our small town. People talked, as they do, but the chatter had changed. It wasn't just gossip anymore, it was concern, pity even. I remember thinking about how quickly life can change. One bad decision, one wrong turn, and everything you've worked for can come crashing down. It's a humbling thought, makes you appreciate what you have. So, as I went about my day, picking out wedding invitations, tasting cakes, I couldn't help but spare a thought for my ex. Once part of my life, now just a shadowy figure on the periphery, a reminder of how unpredictable and harsh this world can be. Life's a journey, they say, full of ups and downs. My path was heading upwards, towards a new beginning, while hers seemed to be a never-ending descent. But in the end, we all walk our own roads, carrying our burdens, facing our demons. And sometimes, all you can do is hope that the road eventually leads you back into the light. The thing about hitting rock bottom is sometimes, just when you think things can't get any worse, life proves you wrong. That's what happened to my ex-wife. Fresh out of jail, she found herself backstabbed by the one friend she thought she had left. This so-called friend, who'd also been in the gutter, saw an opportunity and took it. Used my ex for some quick cash, then kicked her to the curb. Talk about a low blow. So there she was, no roof over her head, no one to turn to. The streets became her home. I saw her once, huddled under a pile of newspapers in the park. It was a cold, damp morning, and there she was, trying to keep warm. My heart sank. No matter what had gone down between us, no one deserves that. A guy who used to work with her spotted her too. Tried to offer help, maybe a place to stay or some work. But pride, or maybe shame, got the better of her. She turned him down flat, said she'd sort herself out. That's the thing about pride, it can keep you warm, but it sure won't put a roof over your head. I heard through the grapevine that she started keeping a journal, writing down her thoughts, her regrets. Maybe it was therapeutic, a way to make sense of the mess her life had become. I wondered what she wrote about. Our life together, where things went wrong, the spiral that took her from a warm bed to a cold park bench? It's strange, you know. There you are, planning a wedding, tasting cakes, picking out suits, and there's this person you once shared everything with, out there somewhere, writing in a journal about where it all went wrong. I'd think about her at night sometimes, lying in bed next to my fiancé. I'd wonder if she was safe, if she was warm, if she had enough to eat. It's funny how someone can be out of your life, but never really out of your thoughts. The journal thing stuck with me. It was like she was trying to piece herself back together, one word at a time. I respected that. It takes guts to look at yourself, warts and all, and try to learn from it. So as I moved forward with my life, I couldn't help but look back at hers. It was like a cautionary tale, a reminder of how fragile it all is. You're one decision, one mistake away from a completely different life. Her downfall was a mix of bad choices and bad luck. And as much as I wanted to shut that chapter of my life for good, I couldn't help but feel a pang of something. Not love, not anymore, but a kind of sad acknowledgement of the shared history that once was. Life's a journey, all right. One person's path leads to happiness, another's to a park bench. And all you can do is hope that somewhere along the way, they find their way back to a better road. Just when you think things can't get any worse, they do. That's what happened to my ex. Her journal, the one thing she clung to, was swiped right out of her hands by a homeless guy. Can you imagine? That journal was her lifeline, where she spilled her heart out, and just like that, it was gone. She was devastated, said it felt like losing a part of herself. That's the thing about hitting rock bottom, even the ground beneath you can crumble. She decided to leave town after that, start fresh somewhere else. But starting over's tough when you've got no one to lean on. She struggled, scraping by on odd jobs, living hand to mouth. It's a hard world out there, especially when you're trying to rebuild from scratch. Meanwhile, life was good on my end. Wedding plans were coming along, and every day was brighter than the last. I heard through the grapevine that she'd been asking about me, about our old life. But honestly, I was too caught up in my own happiness to give it much thought. I'd moved on, and looking back just didn't seem worth it. Then, fate played a cruel hand. We bumped into each other at a local event. There I was, laughing with my fiancé, and there she was, a ghost from the past. Our eyes met, and for a second it was like the whole world stopped. I saw the recognition, the pain, the nostalgia in her eyes. And then she looked away, lost in the crowd. The last I heard of her, she was seen walking alone as the first snow of the season began to fall. They said she looked like a shadow of her former self, wandering aimlessly, as if she didn't quite belong anywhere anymore. That image stuck with me, her, walking away in the falling snow. It was poetic in a sad sort of way, like a scene from a movie. The snow, pure and untouched, contrasting with the harsh reality of her life. It made me think, about how life can take such unexpected turns. There I was, gearing up for a new chapter, full of hope and happiness, and there she was, lost in a world that had moved on without her. It's weird how two lives that were once so intertwined can diverge so drastically. I found myself hoping that she'd find some peace, some corner of the world where she could start again, really start again. But as I watched her disappear into the snow, I knew some stories don't have happy endings. Sometimes, all you're left with are memories and what could have beens. And sometimes, all you can do is keep walking, one foot in front of the other, through the snow and into whatever comes. The screech of tires outside ripped me from the newspaper. I slammed it down, frustration burning in my gut. There she was, all smiles, arms slung around Mark's shoulders like they were old friends. Mark, her coworker, the one she wouldn't shut up about lately. Forced work dinner, she'd said. Just got a show face, honey. Honey, I scoffed. We hadn't used that in months. Mark, all charm and practiced smiles, was unloading boxes from her car. They were laughing, a touch too loud, a touch too familiar. My weekend getaway, the one we'd planned for months, suddenly felt like a bad joke. The door slammed shut behind me. Early? Sarah, my wife, asked, a touch too bright. Just saw the welcoming committee, I said, my voice flat. Her smile faltered for a second. Mark's just helping me bring stuff in. Project deadline coming up, Project deadline? Since when did Sarah, the queen of 8-hour days, stay late on Fridays? My gaze drifted to the abandoned boxes, camping gear, the same stuff we were supposed to be using for our getaway. Right, I mumbled, the suspicion a bitter lump in my throat. The evening was a blur of forced small talk and stolen glances between Sarah and Mark. Every inside joke, every shared laugh felt like a punch to the gut. By the time we left, my head throbbed, and the once exciting weekend stretched before me like a minefield. Back home, the silence was deafening. Sarah busied herself in the kitchen, humming a tune that did little to hide the tension. I grabbed her phone from the counter to charge it, a stupid, impulsive move. A notification popped up, a text from Mark. My heart lurched. I knew I shouldn't, but my fingers tapped the screen, revealing a string of messages filled with smiley faces and playful banter. My blood ran cold. This wasn't work stuff. Weekend plans all set? The last message read. Sarah walked in, her face hardening as she saw the phone. She snatched it back, her eyes blazing. It's nothing, just work. But, the lie hung heavy in the air, a suffocating weight settling on my chest. That night, I barely slept, my mind replaying the scene, the text, the way Sarah looked at Mark. The once familiar scent of her shampoo now felt like a stranger's. The weekend that was supposed to be a chance to reconnect became a chasm between us, a silent accusation hanging in the stale air. And as dawn broke, casting a pale light on the abandoned camping gear in the corner, I knew things were never going to be the same. 3 days, 3 agonizing days of silence from Miller Investigations. My stomach churned like a washing machine on high spin. Was it a dead end? Had I wasted the money, the one thing I could afford right now? The doorbell finally chimed, the sound echoing through the tense quiet of the house. I flung the door open, the private investigator standing there, a manila envelope clutched in his hand. His face was unreadable. Got something for you, he said, his voice gruff. I ripped the envelope open, the photos inside tumbling onto the coffee table. My breath hitched, there they were, Sarah and Mark, arms wrapped around each other, laughing at a restaurant, a kiss stolen on a darkened street corner. The evidence, stark and undeniable, slammed into me like a physical blow. My vision swam with a mix of anger and betrayal. Sarah walked in at that moment, her smile faltering as she saw the photos scattered on the table. "What's this?" she stammered, her voice tight. "Don't play dumb," I spat, shoving the photos in her face. "What the hell is this, Sarah?" The color drained from her cheeks, but her defiance sparked. "It's nothing," she lied, snatching a photo. "We were just..." "Just what?" I roared, my voice thick with rage. "Just having an affair, just making a fool out of me?" Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't care. The hurt, the anger, it all boiled over. We were supposed to be a team, and she'd turned traitor. "You never made time for me," she yelled back, her voice cracking. "You were always too busy with work, too distant." Blame shifting, classic, but it wouldn't work this time. "Don't try to twist this around," I shot back. "There's no excuse for what you did." She opened her mouth to retort, but I cut her off. "Get out," the word tasted like ash in my mouth, but it needed to be said. Silence hung heavy in the air, broken only by her shaky breaths. Her eyes darted around the room, landing on the investigator, who stood impassively by the door. Shame flickered in her gaze for a fleeting moment before she stormed out, slamming the door behind her. The house echoed with a sound, and a wave of loneliness washed over me. But beneath it, there was a flicker of something else, a cold, hard resolve. The photos on the table weren't just proof of betrayal, they were a war declaration. And I wouldn't go down without a fight. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sterile glow over the office. But the air crackled with something far more potent, gossip. Whispers followed me like a shadow as I walked down the hallway, stolen glances and hushed giggles punctuating the morning routine. It didn't take a genius to figure out why. News of Sarah's little extracurricular activities with Mark had spread like wildfire. The same Mark who sat across from me, a sickening smirk plastered on his face. "Morning, John," he chirped, his voice dripping with false cheer. I ignored him, the urge to deck him a right hook burning in my gut. The rest of the day was a blur of awkward silences and pointed stares. My colleagues, once friendly faces, now seemed to view me with a mix of pity and something else, a hint of schadenfreude that twisted my stomach. Mark, the weasel, used the situation to his advantage. He hovered around the boss's door, dropping hints and, casually, mentioning his late nights finishing up projects that Sarah, conveniently, was also helping with. By lunchtime, my appetite was gone. I sat alone in the break room, drowning my sorrows in lukewarm coffee. My phone buzzed with a notification. A Facebook post from a mutual friend, a passive-aggressive comment clearly aimed at Sarah. The anger simmered inside me, threatening to boil over. Back at my desk, another message popped up, this time a private message. It was Sarah's sister, someone I'd always considered close. "I can't believe it," it read. "I'm so disappointed in her. You deserve better." The message offered a flicker of comfort, but it was quickly drowned out by the sting of betrayal. Not just from Sarah, but from everyone around me. The office, once a place of routine and camaraderie, now felt like a hostile environment. Every corner held a judgmental stare, every conversation a hushed reference to my shattered marriage. The humiliation was suffocating, a constant reminder of the mess my life had become. As I left that day, the weight of the world seemed to press down on me. The once familiar walk home felt like a journey through a battlefield. The fight for my future, for my self-respect, had just begun. And I, the wounded warrior, had to find the strength to stand tall, even in a world that seemed determined to knock me down. The silence in the house was deafening. Sarah's clothes lay abandoned on the chair, a forgotten scent of her perfume hanging in the air. It had been a week since I'd walked out, the walls suddenly feeling like they were closing in on me. The lawyer's words echoed in my head, temporary separation, a fancy term for the gaping wound in our marriage. The knot in my stomach tightened as I heard a knock on the door. It wasn't Sarah, it was Mike, my old college buddy, a tall drink of water with a concerned frown etched on his face. "Hey, man," he said, his voice gruff. "Heard things got rough." I grunted, a wave of anger washing over me. Rough wasn't even close. Betrayal, humiliation, that's what it was. "You all right?" Mike asked, his gaze scanning the sparsely furnished apartment. "Yeah, just peachy," I mumbled, sarcasm dripping from my voice. He pulled up a chair. "Look," he said, his tone serious, "divorce is ugly, believe me. But you gotta keep your head above water." He was right, lawyer bills were piling up, and the thought of Sarah potentially hiding money only added fuel to the fire. "She moved out her stuff," I blurted out, needing to vent. "But I wouldn't be surprised if she stashed some things away first." Mike leaned back, a thoughtful look on his face. "You got any proof, bank statements, anything?" Proof, the word echoed in my head. I thought back to the joint safety deposit box at the bank. We hadn't used it in ages, but... "There's a safety deposit box," I admitted. "But it needs both signatures to open it." Mike's eyes lit up. "Maybe not anymore." He pulled out his phone, his fingers flying across the screen. "There's a new law in our state, if there's infidelity involved, a spouse can request sole access to a joint account." A spark of hope flickered within me. This wasn't about revenge, it was about getting what was rightfully mine. "You serious?" I asked, a tremor in my voice. "Dead serious," Mike said, a determined glint in his eyes. "Let's get you squared away." A new battle line had been drawn. The anger was still there, raw and burning. But with Mike by my side, I felt a flicker of something else. A chance to fight back, to navigate this mess with a bit more control. The road ahead was long and winding, but for the first time since the world seemed to crumble, I felt a glimmer of hope. The bank manager cleared his throat, his gaze shifting between me and the document in his hand. "Mr. Smith," he began, his voice tight, "it appears there are discrepancies in your wife's spending habits." Discrepancies? That was putting it mildly. The bank statement listed a string of unfamiliar charges, expensive dinners, luxury hotel stays, all happening during nights Sarah claimed to be working late. The blood drained from my face. This wasn't just spending sprees, this was financing an affair. Anger, hot and raw, coursed through me. "These charges," I choked out, slamming the statement on the table, "they're all from around the same time." The manager nodded, his face sympathetic. Client confidentiality obviously gave him pause, but the evidence spoke for itself. These dates coincide with a period where Mrs. Smith requested increased access to a previously dormant safety deposit box. The box, the one we hadn't touched in years. My stomach churned. "Can you tell me if anything valuable was removed?" He shook his head. "Unfortunately, no. However, based on these transactions, it appears funds were definitely transferred elsewhere." My mind raced. Hidden accounts, that was it, proof of Sarah's betrayal, not just an emotional one, but a financial one as well. "I need to know where that money went," I said, my voice tight with determination. The manager explained the limitations of client privacy, but with a court order. I knew what I had to do. Later, armed with the bank statement and a newfound sense of purpose, I marched into Mike's office. He whistled as he scanned the document. "Hidden accounts, huh? Looks like your wife wasn't just playing fast and loose with your heart." "There's more," I said, my voice grim. I explained about the safety deposit box, the missing funds. Mike leaned back, a crafty glint in his eyes. "Let's get dirty," he declared. He spent the next hour outlining a plan. It wouldn't be pretty, but it would expose Mark for the snake he was. The next day, an anonymous email landed in the inbox of Sarah's company HR department. It contained an itemized list of Mark's late-night expenses, courtesy of Sarah's hidden accounts, along with a detailed timeline of their affair. The satisfaction wasn't sweet, but it was a start. A week later, the news broke. Mark was fired, his reputation in tatters. The whispers in the office shifted, the pitying glances now aimed at him. It wasn't revenge, exactly, but a dose of karma, served cold. My fight was far from over, but as I watched Mark slink out of the building, head hung low, a sliver of vindication warmed the cold anger in my chest. This was just the first blow. The war for the truth, for what was rightfully mine, had begun. The screen glowed like a battlefield map, the comments a barrage of fire aimed at Sarah and Mark. My heart pounded, a mix of fear and defiance coursing through me. I'd hit post on the anonymous account exposing their affair, a move I hadn't planned, driven by a surge of raw anger. The image, a loved-up selfie from Sarah's forgotten Facebook page, was a dead giveaway. The comments exploded, a mix of shock, disgust, and schadenfreude. Mark, the supposed rising star at his company, was now a social media pariah. Guilt gnawed at the edges of my satisfaction. This wasn't the high road, but the thought of them getting away with it, of Sarah using our finances to fuel her betrayal, made my blood boil. The next few days were a whirlwind. My phone buzzed with notifications, a mix of outrage reactions from Sarah's friends and furious messages from Mark himself, all drowned out by the silent treatment I was giving them. No answer, no response, just a wall of silence. Mike, ever the strategist, saw opportunity in the chaos. Use this, he said, his eyes gleaming. He outlined legal loopholes that could expose Mark's shady financial dealings, potentially impacting Sarah's settlement. It wasn't noble, but in the ruthless world of divorce law, every advantage counted. Days turned into weeks, the silence in my apartment deafening. Sarah's attempts to contact me went unanswered. It was excruciating, but necessary. No more manipulation, no more false promises. This was about rebuilding my life, brick by painful brick. One evening, at a work event, I saw her across the room. Her eyes widened, a flicker of desperation replacing the usual smugness. I forced a smile, not at her, but at a colleague, as I engaged in light conversation. The message was clear. I was moving on. The hurt lingered, a dull ache under my ribs. But the anger fueled a new drive at work. I focused on every deadline, every project, channeling my emotions into something productive. Maybe even a promotion was in sight. The thought of therapy crossed my mind, a voice whispering about the need to heal. But for now, I couldn't afford the time or the luxury. The legal battle loomed like a dark cloud, lawyer bills stacking up on both sides. The stalemate stretched on, negotiations going nowhere. Asset division, spousal support, everything seemed to be a point of contention. The once familiar house, now a symbol of shattered dreams, seemed to mock me as I drove past. The possibility of a trial, long and expensive, hung heavy in the air. The anger might fade, but the financial strain of this war was a new reality. Still, I wouldn't give in. I wouldn't let them win, not again. This was about more than money. It was about reclaiming my life, my dignity, piece by agonizing piece. My phone buzzed on the table, the caller ID a jumbled mess of unknown numbers. Usually, I wouldn't answer, but a nagging suspicion gnawed at me. Hello? I said, my voice wary. Mr. Smith? A frantic voice crackled through the receiver. It's Mark's ex-wife, Lisa. You gotta listen to me. My jaw clenched. The last person I expected to hear from was the woman Mark had supposedly left for Sarah. Intrigue warring with caution, I listened. Over the next 10 minutes, Lisa spilled her guts. Mark, she claimed, had a history of infidelity, weaving elaborate lies to juggle relationships. She even had emails, proof of his manipulative tactics. He told me the same things about Sarah, she choked out, said she was controlling, unhappy. It was all a lie. The world tilted on its axis. Could it be true? Was Sarah as much of a victim as I'd been a fool? A flicker of hope, fragile and dangerous, flickered within me. Hanging up, I stared at the phone, thoughts swirling. Mike's voice cut through the fog. What was that? I explained Lisa's call, the evidence she offered. An incredulous whistle escaped his lips. Hold on, he said, his fingers flying across his keyboard. Let's see if this story checks out. An hour later, we were staring at a damning paper trail. Credit card statements from Sarah, maxed out with luxury purchases coinciding with Mark's late nights at work. The hidden accounts, a web of deceit spun by both of them. Anger flared, hot and furious, but it was quickly eclipsed by a crushing sense of betrayal. Not just from Sarah, but from the picture of a happy marriage I'd been clinging to. The next morning, the lawyer dropped a bombshell. An old college buddy, Sarah's best friend from before me, had reached out. Apparently, Sarah had been reaching out to her, expressing regret, a desperate hope to salvage the marriage. The news left me numb. Could Sarah's tears be genuine? Or was this just another ploy? Days blurred into weeks, Lisa's story, backed by evidence, became part of the legal proceedings, weakening Sarah's side. Mark, facing the consequences of his lies, attempted to reconcile with Lisa, a desperate move that backfired spectacularly. The tables had turned, and the air crackled with a sense of twisted justice. As for me, I was adrift in a sea of uncertainty. Part of me, a small, vulnerable part, yearned to believe Sarah's remorse. But the other part, scarred and wary, held firm. Trust, once broken, wouldn't be easily mended. The road ahead was far from clear, but for the first time since the world had shattered, the future held a glimmer of possibility, however faint. The journey to healing, to whatever lay beyond this wreckage, had just begun. The air crackled with nervous energy as we sat across from each other, the sterile conference room a far cry from the warmth of our old kitchen. Months of negotiations, accusations, and emotional turmoil had culminated in this moment, the final settlement. My lawyer droned on about asset distribution, spousal support, minimal, thankfully, but the numbers blurred. All I saw was Sarah, her face pale and drawn, a stark contrast to the confident woman I once knew. Did she even recognize the man staring back at her, a stranger forged in the fires of betrayal? The final gavel came down, a dull thud that echoed in the silence. We signed the papers, a final, irrevocable severing of ties. Relief washed over me, a heavy weight finally lifted. This wasn't victory, not exactly, but a bittersweet closure. Leaving the office, I blinked in the sunlight, the world seeming sharper, more vibrant. The anger that had fueled me for so long was fading, replaced by a quiet emptiness. Mike, ever the optimist, clapped me on the shoulder. Time to rebuild, he boomed. Rebuilding. The word hung in the air. It wouldn't be easy. Therapy sessions, filled with awkward silences and probing questions, became my new routine. Slowly, tentatively, I started to untangle the mess of emotions, the hurt, the anger, the lingering flicker of love. Forgiveness, a foreign concept, began to take root, a fragile seed pushing through the cracks of pain. Dating, once a source of joy, felt like navigating a minefield. Every smile, every shared joke, held the potential for another heartbreak. But with time, the fear receded, replaced by a cautious curiosity. Coffee dates turned into weekend getaways, tentative laughter into something more real. Life after divorce wasn't a fairy tale ending, but a new beginning, written one uncertain step at a time. I focused on work, throwing myself into projects, finding solace in the familiar rhythm of deadlines and achievements. The empty house, once a constant reminder of what I'd lost, slowly transformed into a reflection of who I was becoming, stronger, more independent. Then, the unexpected happened. A knock on the door, a familiar face framed by the evening light. It was Sarah, her eyes red-rimmed, a hesitant smile playing on her lips. She held a worn envelope, addressed to me in her familiar handwriting. "There's something you should see," she said, her voice barely